Hello, everyone. Oh, that was very smooth. The timing of that tea, the flex of the flask. Hey, John, how you doing?
I couldn't be better, Harry. I'm talking to you this morning, and it's a beautiful day. My daughter's healthy, and it's raining. Those are two of my favorite things in the world.
Amazing. Didn't expect you to love the raining, but that's something new I know now. Amazing. Alrighty. Welcome everyone who's live on LinkedIn. If you are live on LinkedIn and you're new to a LinkedIn event, basically becomes a Twitch stream. If you say hi, I'll see your comments in the chat. This is going to be a conversational chat about the gaming layoffs that's happened over the last month and what we can do about it. We've seen a lot of helpful resources for people looking for jobs. So we were hoping to have a conversation here about kind of aspiring leaders and what we can do kind of as an industry to hopefully combat the layoffs in the future and practical things we can do also if you're in a situation where you're expecting layoffs or you recently suffered from layoffs. So hopefully we just get a lot of practical takeaways from this chat. So I introduce you all to John Waltham. If you don't know him, John has been head of TA at the Apple, big name, and then Amazon, but now is also VP of Games for Love, which I would love you to tell me in your own words. What is it that you're currently up to?
Yeah, so thank you for the intro. Thanks for having me here this morning, Harry. But beyond all, thank you for elevating this conversation that really needs to happen right now, especially in the wake of, gosh, since we scheduled this topic has only grown in magnitude. Even looking at some statistics that we'll be pulling up on screen here soon to quantify these statements, it's so important that you're using your voice to elevate visibility and voices of people who are being kind of marginalized in new ways right now. But anyway, to me, I am so excited to be part of a couple of organizations right now. One, you've got Games for Love. If anyone has seen Games for Love, you may have encountered us at various conventions, some online charity streams like our Winter for Love. We do really one thing. We put video games in children's hospitals, and we make sure that the doctors there know how to integrate those games into care protocols to accomplish our end goal, which is replacing pain with play and hopefully even saving lives. And we've by our math been able to support about 6 million kids in getting access to games over the course of all the devices and all the initiatives that we've run. And we love it. We see games, as I hope many do that are listening right now, or and maybe even somebody who doesn't. We can change your mind a little bit. Games can be transformative. I believe games can heal. While games, like anything else, have a dark side, like addiction, for the most part, for the vast part, games are a way that we connect, that we can become and even be something different. And when you are that kid in the cancer ward for 2.5 months, 3 months, a year, you want to be and go somewhere different. And games can transport you. And that's the magic that we so enjoy being able to be part of. Apart from that, I am really enjoying this chapter in my life as a new dad and a sort of advisor. I'm kind of doing some side quests in life that I've meant to do, and I get to advise all these exciting initiatives, organizations like freename.io, which is a Web3. So excited to talk about blockchain. I've learned so much in the last few months about blockchain and Web3 with games, and I feel like I'm still just scratching the surface. So yeah, there's me in a nutshell.
It's so cool. It's just literally so cool because like when you look at your LinkedIn profile, it's like you've completed a chapter and now you're doing exactly what you want to do and you're doing it well with still the same energy and just hats off to you and
Thanks,
very
brother.
eloquently said at the start. Fantastic. Alrighty, so bit of housekeeping. So this will be a conversational chat. Everyone who's live, you can put in questions and we'll get to them at the end of the conversation. So first thing up in terms of questions. So I wanted you to give us some context. So you, unlike many in the game industry, were actually around from a recruitment perspective, like in the trenches during the 2008 crash. When we were having our conversation at the start of the year, I thought that kind of perspective is really needed right now. So I wanted you to potentially give us a bit of that context just to start this conversation on like what is happening over the last month, year, and how does that relate to history?
Yeah. So, gosh, it seems so crazy because that 2007 into 2008 global financial collapse, it feels like it was just yesterday because it was such a significant event. But there are some almost eerie similarities between what happened then and what's happening now, except from a macroeconomic sort of down forces, those are similar, whereas the industry of application in this case is more specific to games and more specialty niche tech, where you're really seeing those downward forces manifesting. All that is to say, 2008 was a real interesting time to be in talent acquisition. And at that time, we were really, at that time, I was working with an organization called REI, which is actually outdoor gear. We were a little bit more insulated than many, but we still had a lot of corporate hiring to do. We still aspired to grow. That is a unique business model called a co-op, which is unlike a corporation or a 501c3 nonprofit. It's sort of somewhere in between the two, but it's owned by essentially the customers and employees. So we had a lot of solidarity. We were able to navigate financially with really prudent decisions. We avoided layoffs as an entire company, which was kind of impossible at the time, especially one that depended heavily on retail sales at the time. They had yet to go fully omni-channel. So we were a little bit lucky, but it was really interesting to be having the few jobs that were open and to see a very similar world to what we see in games right now, where even an entry-level job, you would see multiple tiers of seniority applying for it and in droves. So I'm seeing a lot of posts, especially this last couple of weeks, about people being one of 1,000 applicants, or seeing this deluge. You go on LinkedIn and you can actually see, if you, I believe this is available for everybody, or it might just be a premium thing. You can see the seniority levels of other people that have applied. And even jobs that come across my desk, I'll see, it's like a director level role. It'll say, 50 director level applicants, 100 VP level applicants, 40 C-suite applicants, and you're talking about 4 or 5 down levels there. So it's really wild right now in games, and those same sort of market forces are present. We can't have a conversation about money without talking about interest rates and kind of where we are right now financially. Interest rates are a proxy for risk tolerance. Basically, we're saying we're not super certain about what's going on right now. So if you're going to give away your money to somebody else, you need to be able to get a higher rate of return because it's more likely that something's going to go wrong. It's basically what interest rates are. And so right now, in an uncertain world, especially in 2024, which I'm excited to talk about when we get to what do we do with all this information? How does the listener right now actually apply that information? It's important to consider that, because these are big forces that are not somebody's fault, even the companies that we're going to talk about. And I'm an unapologetically high critic of some of the business practices that are going on right now around the world, specifically in games. I don't work for anybody right now, and none of my opinions are necessarily reflected by my current or former associations or even future. I say that now because when I say what I'm going to say, I want to make sure people know that this has nothing to do with anybody but
the truth.
Well, as one person sees it, in one person's lens.
Alrighty, awesome. So the first one is, why do layoffs happen? I think you covered it a little bit there, but that's my first question. Like, why do layoffs happen?
Well, first I want to acknowledge, I see a friend in the audience, Amani Shams. Hello, Amani, formerly of Blizzard, of EA, of Nike. Great to see you. Just a wonderful human being. If anyone's looking for an amazing member of your DEI team or your culture team, that name right there is one you should write down, Amani Shams. So why do layoffs happen? Layoffs happen for a wide range of reasons. You could also ask a similar question. And I think it's really important to first conflate and then dissect layoffs versus studio closures. They're not necessarily the same thing, but they have the same net impact, or a very similar net impact, I should say. It feels different when you are laid off versus when you lose your role because your company folded up. But ultimately, it tracks back, in my opinion, to largely immature financial practices. And that could be on the part of the business that needed to have the layoffs or that chose to have the layoffs, or it could be on the part of the industry. And I think that in the last 3 years, we've seen both of those things, several instances of irresponsible financial management by companies for reasons that we'll talk about when we get to that slideshow, looking at some data, but also an industry that got too hot too fast, right? It just grew out of control. We all know COVID. We all spent a lot of money on Genshin Impact. We all spent a lot of money on Fortnite, right? We all jumped in and played, not only spending our money, but our time in unprecedented levels. And that led to unmitigated growth. Look, if you got a big garden and all of a sudden it starts drenching rain, stuff's going to grow like crazy and you're not going to be able to fully control it. So I certainly, while I'm going to be very critical of a couple of specific companies, I'm not going to say that anyone should have been able to predict what happened, and nobody has a crystal ball. So that's important to say. But here's the deal. Layoffs happen because executives choose to engage in layoffs. And I want to be very, very clear about that. Layoffs happen because executives choose to engage in them, whether because they are pressured and doing the job as prescribed by a board. CEOs have a boss, and that boss is a board. Any name that you can think of with the letter CEO after it, their boss is the board, who ultimately reports to their shareholders if it's a publicly traded company or whoever has stakeholders. Now, I say that because I firmly believe, in having been what you might call a big leader at some of these companies, I firmly believe that it's vital to attach business results to leadership, right? And I like to, for a moment, anybody here who's curious about what layoff culture looks like, take a look at Nintendo. Take a look at Nintendo in Q3 and 4 of 2023. They saw this coming, and what did they do? Their executives took massive pay cuts across the board. They apologized for not seeing a wave coming. They acknowledged that they mismanaged. They essentially took, in some cases, up to 75% pay cuts. And these are not undercompensated people, so they're not exactly like, going living on top ramen. But still, as I have in the past when I didn't have any money in my checking account. But all that is to say, the buck stops with leadership. And if a layoff is happening, it's because somebody signed off on it. If a studio is closing, now that's a different story. Same impact. Now we dissect the two. A studio closing, which accounted for something like 20% of last year's layoffs and will soon account for more this year. That's a horse of a different color. But that doesn't matter when you're the person who's filling out that unemployment application.
Well, did not know about the Nintendo slashing salaries. I knew they did that way back, but I didn't know they did it this time as well, which goes to show. Because it's funny, it's like in news, right? You see the negative more than the positive. But that I just forgot that happened, and then that could have been like a solution in plain sight, so to speak. But I really like the distinction there. Like a decision is being made despite not being able to meet payroll is coming up. Someone's still deciding to use layoffs as that solution when there are other methods to do that. So now I think it is a very important point. Alrighty, so I believe we have a presentation, John. So in terms of getting the bigger picture.
Let's rock and roll. Now, I know that Restream, which I love this software, by the way, anybody who wants to do anything live, this is crazy. We could actually be pushing this out across Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Live, all this at the same time. It's really cool. And of course, the only social media network that I really love, which is this one right here, LinkedIn. In addition to actually trying to get on TikTok and really starting to learn it now, which has been a huge amount of fun.
Multi-channel, baby. It's the way to go.
I've only recently started to just basically do like career coaching stuff and just basically logging in and doing calls like this and resume reviews. And I just call it nerd work, NERDWERK, little RuPaul ref there / how you say work in German. But nerd work is me on Twitch, on Insta, and on YouTube. Now that said, the reason I went on that tangent is it let me upload my presentation here. I can either share my screen, or if it's usable here, we could just do that.
Let's give it a go.
Let's see. Hey, let's see if it comes up. Yep, it looks like it's eligible as a source to put on.
Alrighty, here we go. Wow, I feel like
here we go.
I'm about to watch a proper presentation. Here we go.
Listen it live. We'll see. This is where we find out if the animations actually translated into Restream. If not, then this is going to be a lot
less.
Find
out together, guys.
Won't have the drama. Okay, so I see questions coming through now. Would you like to, Harry, how would you like to handle questions? Do you want me to acknowledge them as they come? Do you want to just do like a batch Q&A?
I would love to get the presentation done, and then I have my own questions, and then we can kind of especially when it's close to the topic, we can kind of attack the questions as they come. So after the presentation, everyone in the chat, that is an that's a call to action to actually write the questions in. We are seeing them. I'm copying them to a separate document. So even if you can't stay for the whole thing, we will get to them when you can watch them on the recording. So if you have a question, don't have to wait. Just pop it in straight away.
Beautiful. Well, with that said, without further ado, let's talk about combating the next big wave of layoffs. I think it's super important for us to start by first, let's acknowledge something here. So the animations aren't built in, so this is not going to have quite the same level of appeal. For any really visual learners, you'll be able to package it all up at the same time. Here's the thing: before we go any further, we are actively engaging in a sort of desensitization around layoffs. That isn't an accident. Part of the reason why we're seeing layoffs happening the way that they are is it's becoming a norm that companies are calculating has lessened risk. When you're the only company engaging in layoffs and you're a headline, you have significant negative press, and you will see people uninstall your games, and you'll see people kind of turn away from your IP. When it's literally the same as a rising tide lifts all boats, a receding tide drops all boats, and that's kind of what's going on right now. And so that's all well and good. There's some of the psychology maybe behind why the business decisions that are being made. But here's the thing. These are all people, right? And some of those people are on the scale. There's a couple of names I've seen in the questions already who I know have unfortunately been affected by layoffs in the very, very recent times. And these are people. These are human beings. We use words like layoffs and reductions in force. We use these crazy big numbers like 530 in one day and 1,800 in 72-hour periods. Those numbers are names associated with every single one of those. And if you are one of those people, this is just a moment to pause and say, you might be tired of being referred to as, one of 530. You're a human being, and this sucks. And I just want to pause for a second and rehumanize for just 1 second. I'll get off that soapbox now, but y'all are not alone. And that's why we're doing what we're doing right here today, alongside many, many other people. Okay, so here's a stat that I ran a few different times to make sure that it was accurate, and because I didn't want to believe it, but this is there's certainly some sample size bias here. And we have a small n. N would be your sample size, is what you would use in a formulaic expression. We have approximately 250% of increase in layoffs from 2023 into 2024. This is just January versus January. Now, that's not a perfect measure, and it's certainly not any hard and fast indicator of what the year ahead necessarily looks like, but it's also not great. It's not ideal. I would rather be saying, oh, we're down 50% on layoffs, and it could go in the other direction, but this is not ideal. We all know where these have come from. Most recently, just Monday, of course, we saw Riot announce 530. Of course, its parent company Tencent being involved there. But this is important to say, mostly because we are trending in a direction where we all need to be more aware and more prepared. And that's why I'm especially grateful to Harry for creating this space for us. So let's move a little bit more rapidly. Otherwise, this turns into the John Makes a Presentation show. So how do we get here? I'm going to speed this up versus what it originally was, Harry, and just kind of do a little bit more of a bullet point rapid fire. So
let's do it.
Ultimately, how do we get here? In this one person's opinion, based upon what I've read and what I've observed in the stories that I've heard, the classic paradox of the individual contributor rising to the management level happened at an unbelievable scale here. You saw 2020 come, many companies 2, 3, 4x'd. There just wasn't, and still is not, enough available skilled leadership that has the business acumen to make educated financial decisions with foresight, with perspective, with human consideration. That just didn't exist. Skilled leaders in games are a scarce resource right now. And if you want proof of that, go in and take a look at the roles that are open. When you find leadership roles in creative, in production, development, in corporate, non-tech, you see deluges of these roles that are sitting open, which it certainly hurts my feelings when I see that. But we need skilled leaders. We didn't have them. The people that were there at the time promoted and did not receive the training, didn't have the education to, again, look at a P&L, profit and loss statement, to look at demand planning, and to create educated glide paths toward big hiring goals versus project, so on and so forth. Second, immature financial practices. This is a subset of that first one right there. If you don't have a roadmap, if you don't have a clear financial path toward the projects and the products, you do end up having to send emails like what we saw. By the way, I do want to call out, as critical as I am, sounding like a borderline socialist here, critical of business leaders, I will say that I want to really highlight the way that Riot handled their layoffs this week. They acknowledged the fact that they kind of grew bloated in key areas and really did a good job of explaining why. I felt like did a good job of explaining why that happened. Now, it's the best version of the worst case. And so this is not a celebratory comment, but when this sort of thing happens, you do provide extensive severance. You do provide medical coverage. You do provide job replacement assistance. You do provide access to the tertiary benefits, including, right, even in some cases, it sounds like it's letting people keep their laptops and all of their monitors and peripheral hardware so they can actually do what they need to do, which I thought was notable. I'm not going to use words like commendable or great, because this, again, is the best version of a worst case scenario. But the CEO did highlight the fact that they got there because they made some bad bets. They went all in on some things that just didn't necessarily have a future, out of probably a strategy of hope and optimism. And that sounds great until that sort of email has to get written. Uncontrolled growth. Now, this kind of goes back to 2020, but it also has a lot to do with 2021, because you saw this huge unprecedented growth in some really key areas, specifically mobile games, which is still the Wild West in a lot of cases. It's hard to even to quantify some of the revenue streams that come through online games, where big questions are still out there, like, does online gambling have any connection with games? Many industry estimates, when you see these huge disparities, like you'll see, BCG will come out and say, oh, it's a $280 billion industry right now. And KPMG will come out with their report and say, it's a $396 billion industry right now. That's because sports betting, casino gambling, and a bunch of other stuff that is traditionally called gaming, even tabletop, is that part of gaming? When you roll it all in together, it's closer to that 396. When you look only at video games, it's closer to that 280 something. But the industry growth is still the same, which is about 14, coming up on about 14% year over year. So this uncontrolled growth, which was a 2 and 3x in some cases, is still growing at a very, very rapid rate. A 13.4 to 14% compounded average growth rate is insane. That is massive. You don't see that in cases other than like cell phone adoption and market growth that resulted, GPU purchasing, semiconductor, and of course right now the AI industry, which is growing at like 80% year over year, which is crazy. And lastly, board pressure. So again, CEOs have bosses, and those bosses are boards. Those boards are occupied largely by people who have been big business leaders, and especially thinking about these larger AAA studios. Ultimately, that CEO is hired by and fired by that board, who they, of course, report to the shareholders. So in a company that has shareholders, they're beholden to that. And the way that they navigate those expectations with their shareholders is important. Because if you have an environment that is pure profit, if you have a board culture and a shareholder culture, which is basically, we are privateers that profit at all costs, that's all we're here to do, is to make money, then you will see much more cutthroat practices, and you will see a near complete dehumanization. And there are plenty out here, maybe some pure capitalists, that might say, well, that's how it's supposed to go. That's, evolutionary economics, if you will. I would love to have a separate call and extensively engage in debate about the ethics and morality of that, of those statements, and how inaccurate I believe that they are. But that's what you're going to get if you are in an environment that is only about that coin, as the youth would say, or maybe did say. Maybe they don't say that anymore. I don't know. How do we combat layoffs? Okay, so here's where industry-wide we're going to go real fast. So first, diversifying revenue streams. If you are a company built on the new trend, if you are exclusively on, take for example, if you work for a studio of 500 people that makes every single cent from selling boxes, right? Gotcha game boxes. And then a regulatory official in some country that maybe is the US, is maybe China, EU, there's some big regulatory changes. They decide that you can't sell gotcha boxes anymore. Well, that's 500 people that now have zero revenue to count on. And so you better hope that you got some dry powder underneath the decks, because your cannons just stop firing. So if you have a diversified revenue stream and you're not only looking towards those, in this theoretical case, gotcha boxes, now you perhaps have, say, core software sales, and you have maybe itemization and microtransactions. As much as we all have feelings about microtransactions, it's a huge and growing, vastly growing part of our industry. Are you creating streamer revenue through your media? There's a lot of different things. Long story short, just like any of us should probably have more than one place where our money comes from, so too should your company. And if your company doesn't, it's probably time to start asking some questions before the storm comes. Second is flexible workforce. So anybody here who's a decision maker, the days of people have to be in the office is over. And maybe you don't like that. It's probably because you have a lease that you signed that you're accountable for. Here's the deal. I'm sorry, it's done. It's over. That era has passed. It is the steam engine. The idea of people have to be in X place to accomplish goal Y is such a small subset of available goals out there right now. So lean in. That's all I have to say. Lean in. Look for the best talent where they are. That's generally not going to be up the street from you. That's an incredibly narrow-minded way to look at it. So diversify, go for flexible workforce, whether that's a hybrid model that includes occasional travel or that's fully remote. Get the best people where they are, and usually that means they're at home. Side note, this is your number one way to diversify your talent pool and to create games that reflect the people that you want to play them, which is everyone. That's right, everyone. Upskill and reskill versus layoff. Look, if you are a company, and this sounds a little bit like a letter to CEOs. So, okay, I'll just frame it that way. Look, CEOs, before you think about a layoff, right? Let's go back 6 months, a year before you're sitting down and realizing that you have to draft an email. Think about how you can create a culture of upskill, reskill that folds into a much broader culture of financial rigor around your financial acumen. Hold leaders accountable on the department level to make sure that before they engage in a new product, that they're bringing their whole team along for it. Before you necessarily hire more people, consider investing some percentage of that into the reskilling and upskilling of your current staff so that they would be able to fill new roles as they become available. And if you need to make a hard left, you're bringing everybody with you and you're not dropping them off on the side of the road. Lastly, we've got project management. So this, again, if you look at Riot's email, it's a really powerful case study. And he's talking about the fact that they just let some projects get out of control. And a disciplined approach to project management and product teams being really skilled is so vital, because if you do just sort of do everything, if everything's important, nothing's important. And if you don't know exactly where the revenue is going to come from, the revenue probably isn't going to come. So strategies of hope are very dangerous, especially in this environment. Individuals. Okay, so I doubt there's any like companies here in the chat. So here's tips that I would give to everybody here, and then we'll move rapidly into resources that hopefully will help everybody actually do some of these things in a way that goes past just some schmuck in a Contra shirt, which is, by the way, it's Stallone and Schwarzenegger, and then it's the alien from the actual Alien movies here. So this is like a flagrant violation of like every IP I could find. Anyway, it's the best shirt I own, I think. Pack your parachute, folks. So think about, what would you do if you got laid off today? And if the first thought that comes to your mind is, well, that will never happen. Well, we've got north of 2,500 people so far in January that would probably say that they recently felt the same way. And that's not to instill a sense of fear. This is the same reason why you have fire insurance, why you have an evacuation bag, why you keep your documents in somewhere that if your house burned down, they would be safe. You need to have the professional equivalent of this. And there was a long time ago, and they probably still make versions of this. There's a book called What Color is Your Parachute? And it really just calls us to think about, if your whole industry burned down, Think about being in real estate in 2007 and 8. Kind of being in real estate right now in a lot of ways. If you think about it, some interesting things happening there. Your whole world just kind of shook up and kind of almost vanished. If you were living in China a few weeks ago, when all of a sudden a regulatory shift, reduced market value by almost $50 billion for like a hot second, you know how that feels. And so know what your parachute looks like, whether that's side revenue, whether that's your Etsy shop, whether that's a CPA degree that you or license that you have on the side where you go do that work. If it's a fungible skill that you perform at a gaming company or somewhere else and you want to perform it in a gaming company, maintain that skill. So that if you needed to step into another industry or step out of your current game company into a different one very quickly, make sure it's as fungible as it can get. And that might mean accreditations, things like Coursera, learning on Codefinity, whatever that is. Just keep yourself sharp and know that you've got more than one parachute in your pack. Your network is your net worth. Old saying, I still love it. It's an oversimplification, but here's the thing. Do the work. Get curious. Talk to people in industry. I strongly recommend, whether you are in the most stable role, maybe you're in a union protected role, you love it, and you think you'll never want to leave. Well, who knows? Maybe you have the opposite. Maybe you are in the Lotus Garden and you could be growing faster somewhere else. And all of a sudden you realize that. It's like the reverse of a layoff. It's more like you're stuck in something. Build that network now. I strongly recommend everybody here, no matter what you're doing, no matter where you are, doing at least 2 informational interviews per month. And that takes a lot of work and it turns into kind of a hobby, but I do it and I love it. I look forward to them being on either side of that conversation. And informational interviews, there's a lot of that content out there. Hit me up if you want a guide on that.
Can you explain that 1 second? Informational interviews, is that like an e-coffee, for example?
Yeah. Virtual coffee, e-coffee. I like the term informational interviews because it seems to carry a little bit more specificity. Essentially, you're asking somebody for a time-bound amount of their finite resource, which is their time, where you're going to ask them 2 to 3 questions to understand their world and get to know them. Very simple, right? Professional networking. It's not veiled. It's not some weird dance that you're trying to choreograph with somebody to feel like you're a salesperson or something. No, you're literally like, hey, Harry, I've been engaging with your content for a while now, and I really love your tone and your thought process around how we can build up this industry that I love so much. I want to do what you do, and I would love to get to know you and how you go about it. Do you have a 15-minute window in the next couple of weeks where we could actually sit down and I could just ask you a few questions? Here's my Calendly link or my Motion link. If you'd like to set up that time, here it is. Harry's probably going to take that bait. And he's probably going to sit down with you and you're going to learn from Harry, right? Like it's not just because Harry's amazing. We all like talking about ourselves, and that's one of the best ways to build a network. Does it sound smarmy? A little bit. Are you trying to hide behind any intentions that are unclear? Absolutely not. You are literally saying, I'm here to build my network.
That's the key. That's the key. I'm thinking, John, should I remove the presentation and then we can have our faces big?
I've got one slide after this one. So I'll just move quickly through this one and then I'll pull it down. Lastly, target roles that are stable. And if you have the gift of starting over, which is not a gift any of us want, we sometimes get gifts from largely our family that we don't want. I've had the gift of starting over a few times in my life, and it's not one you want at the time, but you look back and perhaps it was a good one. If you do have that gift right now and you get to start new, I would strongly consider looking toward roles that are non-negotiables, that are as close to what you do now as you can get. And who knows what that is? Maybe that's you work in finance and you've been a financial planner and modeler for a long time. Demand planning is one of those areas that's infinite need right now in games. I don't see a single one of those jobs getting laid off. They're not part of those. Like they are the cash register, if you will. So anyway, do some research, and I would recommend targeting roles. If you get to set a path that you're going to hit in a year, I would chart it towards something that's very stable within these companies. That said, ending on a quote here. This is my favorite quote, and it's simply this: win or learn, never lose. And I don't know who said it, but I guarantee it was somebody who never lost. So whatever is happening, whatever is going on, this is all about resilience and this is all about attitude. It is not about the fact that this is hard. And this is a time to also be very human, very patient with ourselves. If you just experienced a layoff or you think you might be about to, you're living in a very, very difficult chapter. Your psychological safety is compromised. Your financial safety might be compromised. Your physical safety might be compromised if you're wondering whether or not you're going to have somewhere to live. This is a real set of concerns that people, maybe even on this call, are having behind those screens. Now, that said, after acknowledging those realities, and we have to, when you get to the like, okay, what do I write on my wall? What affirmation do I think about? This right here is the one that has certainly gotten me through more small incremental failures, willingness to embrace and fail, to send that email and say, hey, can I ask for your time, SVP at company Y that I've grown up loving? And then when that person says no or doesn't respond to you, I learned maybe I could have phrased that question differently, or I could have thought differently about this. But when that 1 in 10 comes back and says, yeah, I'd love to talk to you. P.S. I have 2 mentors from my very favorite gaming companies that purely by virtue of me messaging them and asking, hey, I'm looking for a mentor in this space. I want to be a great leader that builds this industry in meaningful ways. And now they're mentors of mine. And by that, I mean, we meet monthly. I ask them and they help kind of guide my thought processes and to understand what's going on. And if I didn't have this mentality, I never, ever would have thought to do that because I would have been afraid of losing. But instead, I either win or I learn. And so that's my one person approach to that. And that's it. That's the last slide just says a good old fashioned one of these guys. Thank you.
Amazing. I'm buzzing here. That was very, and I love so many things we could unpack there. We have a lot of questions in the chat, which I've collated here, which we'll get through. But a couple points I want to double click on there. You mentioned the last thing there that's in my mind now, that when you sent those messages to mentors, is that by emails, that LinkedIn, because I speak to a lot of people and I feel like everyone likes to do that, but there is a lot of friction between sending those messages, I think, like mentally, because they just feel like they're bugging people and they overthink the logistical side. You gave a very good example for those e-coffees, but I wonder in the mentoring space, would you send an email, a LinkedIn message? And also one thing I want to ask is like, what do you think is a reasonable amount of messages to send before you actually get a response? I feel like some people might send 4, get radio silence, and then be like, "Oh, okay, I'm a horrible human being. I will never do that again," which is not the case. Spoilers. So, yeah, thoughts on like the way you send that message?
That's great. Yeah, certainly no. Here's the number. I do like to play with arbitrary numbers purely as a way to say to start. Much like your chat GPT or the way that you use GPT-4, you shouldn't just be copying and pasting. You shouldn't just be like, act as an influencer on LinkedIn. Say 5 important things about game. No, it's going to be bad. But it is maybe a good place for me to start to get inspirations. Anyway, similar with arbitrary numbers. Look, if you are actively wanting to build your network, especially if you don't really have one, if you're logging in right now and you're watching this through a LinkedIn profile with like 300 connections or something, which there's a lot of right now. A lot of people didn't have this call 3 years ago, and now they got laid off on Monday and they've got like 300 connections, none of whom are in a position to really help them, which can be really scary. So going back in time to reverse that course, informational interviews, not to dwell too exclusively on that, because it's not the only way to build a network. It's just, in my opinion, one of the more effective ways, especially if you're just starting, is, again, be you, be honest, be real, be clear in your intentions. The only thing that I believe really successful people, who you're probably wanting to talk to, the only thing that I think really successful people have an intolerance for is fakeness and untrustworthiness, right? Every single person in the world wants to be part of a story that is meaningful. Every one of us wants to be part of the once upon a time Luke Skywalker. Everybody wants to see you as Luke Skywalker, right? Or Rey, and wants to be part of you getting to where you're going. Everybody wants to feel like Obi-Wan. And with that, if you approach that with enthusiasm and with positivity, and you are willing to iterate your approach over time, you will get incredible results with informational interviews. So, okay, let's assign a number. I would send out, if I'm getting 1 in 10 as a positive response, I would send 5 informational interview requests a week. That's 1 per weekday. That's going to get you 2, likely 2, unless you really get good at this, and then maybe you moderate this. But that's going to get you about 2 informational interviews per month, or less at first. Who knows? And you tweak up the numbers or down. But boy, you're gonna learn a lot in those calls. And one thing I will absolutely say, folks, if you do have an informational interview with somebody, you're gonna lose track of time. You're gonna get real excited, especially if you've said 15 minutes. And here's the thing: I love the 15-minute informational interview because it's almost always the 30-minute informational interview with a very, very powerful moment that happens in the middle. And that's this. Harry, this has been a phenomenal 15 minutes, and I'm so grateful to you for spending this time with me. I never thought in a million years I'd get to learn from somebody like you, and so I'm so grateful to you. We are at the 15-minute mark. I have set aside my whole hour on the off chance that you have more time, and if you do, I'm right here, and if not, I just want to thank you for your time. Now you've given that person an out, because if they're like, hey, I really just wanted to get some coffee, you do not want them to get off that call regretting talking to you. And they will remember the last 30 seconds more than the however many are in 14 minutes and 30 seconds that preceded that. So that's like a hyper micro management skill that I'm recommending. I will say though, when people do that with me on calls, I realize I'm talking to somebody who really knows what they're doing. And I'm talking to somebody who is really respecting my time. Now I want to give them more of it. I've canceled calls when people have said that sort of thing so that I could stay on with them.
No, I 100% agree. I'm thinking about it from my point of view is I always looked at them as like value trades when I think when you put them as the way you're framing it, I think it's more relatable for most people because I feel like you're not setting yourself up with an expectation that you have to deliver anything. I think if you're being that very clear, and I love the way you said 15 minutes and also the ending part where you can give them that out. And I think more times than not, people will give you that extra time. It's very rare that when you book a 15-minute meeting that people end up putting a back-to-back meeting after 15 minutes. It's kind of a hack. If you get 15 minutes and they like you, they might give you the 30. It's pretty likely. So it is great strategy and good numbers as well. Like if you did 5 a week, that's also very manageable. Even if you had a full-time job with kids, you can send 1 message a day. I assure you. One thing I'd add to that, if you want to make it really kind of easy, just one thing you should do, LinkedIn has a decent algorithm when it comes to suggested connections. I started doing it at the start of this year. I just go to my suggested connections and I connect with 5 to 10 people who I'm like, oh, you seem interesting. I personally don't even add a connection message because I post content and then sometimes they say, hey, interested in your content. Or sometimes when we're connected, I see their content and then I send them a message, hey, bye. We connected like 2 weeks ago. Just wanted to introduce myself. I've had a lot of these informational interviews start like that, where you can just start with a connection message. And that's a way to make it without you giving so much mental energy to it. Like, oh, how do I phrase this message? Even if you can do that one message, I have to add that on top, and you can get some easy wins because he's accepted, they accepted. Like you can get that little gamify, that little boost as well, and it makes the connection number go up, which doesn't hurt because you know more people.
Couldn't
Lovely.
agree more. Could not agree more.
Righty, we have around 15 minutes left before WeWork kicks me out. So I will get straight into the questions. So I'm going in order. I do see the questions coming in, and thank you for everyone. I have been looking at my phone, just making sure I get them. So we'll go through these rapido. But yeah, if anyone has follow-up questions, just add them in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. Alrighty, from Andre Lematria. Do you think skilled leaders from other industries could fill in these gaps? The gaps are referring to those senior leaders, leadership, kind of the gap that kind of led to the layoffs. One big factor, anyway.
My answer is unequivocally yes. And so much so that this industry needs to get over ourselves and saying you need to have 4 or 5 years of experience to understand how this works. It's not true. 90% of the time I've heard that. It's not true. Is that true in maybe designing games at their absolute core? Sure. Are the fungible skills that somebody is successful by using at Mattel fungible to move over to PlayStation? Yeah, almost 100% of the time. So right now it's a culture issue and it's a perception gap that any recruiters here have had this pain. Hiring manager, I need this role filled. It's an emergency. Recruiter, okay, great news. There's a million candidates like this. A couple of other industries are shaking up. We've got some really strong talent. Hiring manager, but I need them to have 4 to 5 years of experience for this role that requires 6 to 7 years of total experience. And now we have a conundrum, right? P.S. They have to live up the street. P.S. They need to accept, 75% comp ratio, like blah, 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 blah. Long story short, unrealistic expectations. And I think the number one expectation that people in this industry, if you're a leader in this industry and you're listening to this right now, stop with you have to have gaming experience. Just knock it off. If there's no reason for it, and there's amazing human beings who are fighting to get into this industry who will transform your business. And all you have to do is stop insisting on an arbitrary skill set that you can't define and honestly doesn't exist most of the time.
I agree, and I have the data to prove it. We've placed contractors from industries outside of games, and one big thing that helps us is when we send a candidate over, we will send a little blurb, and if they aren't from the gaming industry, or we know they could do the job because we've had that video call, I always send why they would love to join the game industry, why it kind of doesn't matter. And one thing I want people to remember, these are talking to the candidates now. If you're outside the gaming industry, when you send an application, remember a recruiter is going to be comparing you potentially to someone who's in the game industry. So you might have more skill than that person, but that person might get the interview slot. So if you're thinking, trying to reverse engineer what the recruiter is thinking, if you give them enough benefit of the doubt where this won't be an issue, long story short, in your CV, cover letter, in the message, tell them you think about games and tell them why, how much you think about games and why that actually would help with your kind of job. It might give you that interview, and a lot of the times it's the issue of them not being able to go on the interview. If you get on the interview and then just prove yourself, happy days. So sometimes you just need to get that interview, and if you're not getting interviews and you don't have gaming experience, sometimes you need a kind of referral. These obviously help because then someone can vouch for you. But even if you don't have that, just put it in the blurb of like kind of like the interest section at the bottom. You talk about, oh, I like to play games, which is relevant. Well, actually, just talk about it from a professional point of view. It will help 100%. Fantastic. All right, next question. So this is from Sorab, who's left loads of questions. Thank you so much, Sorab. How can we protect ourselves from potential layoffs in the volatile gaming job market? Any tip? We did cover a little bit of this, but I wonder if any big ones come up to you.
Yeah, I mean, beyond so some very specifics. First and foremost, and I say this in every single call here, because this is a resource that is I have funded millions of dollars of spend from some of these big companies to create things that were half as good as this resource right here. And that is, of course, Amir Satfats, Jobs Resources. Go over to his page right now. If you, for somehow you haven't found your way there yet, get there now. If you're on this call, you're probably interested in a career in games or keeping one, then this is where you need to be. Most of everything we're talking about right here, he's done for you. You've got a mentor pool, a mentee pool. You've got a huge network built around the community. There's a job aggregator that breaks it down by role type, by geography. It's impossibly good. We're actually now I've had the impossibly good luck to work with Amir on the early careers resources. Alex Gambos recently put together the mock interview strategy with Amir. It's so good. It's so good. It's like the Studio Ghibli of resources. So much better than anyone could have possibly made it, and still getting better. That might actually stir up some feelings. People might be like, "What are you talking about, John? Spirited away with the human accomplishment of our entire life, or our entire species." I will mention, though, in addition to all of this, outside ideas, because a lot of what I think I've probably been doing here is regurgitating. I probably sound like the Wall Street Journal and IGN, like having a fight over old fashions in a whiskey bar. But I will say that looking towards new technologies, like this thing that I've been so into, which is this Web3 and games, that is one way to kind of lead your target, right? Like if you zoom further and further out, Call of Duty fans with a sniper rifle, the further and further you get away, the further you have to lead your target if you want to hit what you're aiming at far away. Simple triangulation in physics, right? So Web3 is, take a look at Southeast Asia right now. There's a $1.5 billion fund investing in Web3, primarily in the Southeast Asian market, which is the most rapidly growing mobile and thusly gaming market in the world. Now, those people controlling those $1.5 billion are not doing that out of fun or charity. They see a really strong future there. So the way I'm participating in that is hanging out with these guys at freename.io. They're working on their .gaming domain, which is the sort of like premier centralization of your gaming identity. Their goal is to make that the first thing that every Twitch streamer does, everybody who wants a job in gaming. They gave me, as a part of this working with them, the john.gaming domain, and I use that now as a Web3 central identity. And when Web3 goes native across all browsers, you can just type in john.gaming and it will be my everything. My crypto wallet will be there, my central web ID, my link tree of sorts, and in a really cool sort of way that works in 3 dimensions. And I only say that to say that I'm excited to be able to show that off, because any company that wants to get into Web3 would see that and say, oh, wait a minute, hold on. This guy's not in industry. Let's say I'm working at like Caterpillar, heavy machinery or whatever, right? And I'm a front end developer for them. And I want to be a front end developer for Activision Blizzard. And let's say ABK has this like big push toward Web3. I don't, by the way, know that. I have no data whether or not that's true or not. I'm just using an arbitrary name people know. And they're looking at resumes, and all of a sudden, here's 1 in 100, and this person has expressed savvy in Web3. Now, going back to that question from before, that's one way to get your foot in the door in a really unexpected and fun way. By the way, you get to play with future tech, which is pretty rad.
For sure. And the big point there is you want to give people reasons where they would hesitate. Like I'm thinking for Saurabh's question, the protecting yourself from potential layoffs. Just to add to your point, John, when it comes to connecting what you do to the bottom line, you can do that research yourself. Sometimes that is done by your manager, especially if you're in like a business development role. You know this. But if you're an artist, sometimes it's quite hard to calculate your value, quote unquote. I would figure out what would it cost if this was outsourced. Have those conversations. What would it cost if that feature didn't go out with on that mobile game? Like these are things that they do have numbers to them, although hard to calculate. But if that number isn't 3 to 5 times your salary, let's say, like then you are more vulnerable than the person that is bringing in. Like if you're a senior developer and you lead a team of developers, and if you left, they would have to spend 50 to 100,000 pounds of just recruitment, headcount, manpower to replace you and then train you for 6 months, and that like that person's very unlikely to be laid off. So you can have those things in mind. So if your position can be outsourced, that means they have a cost, and if that ever swaps, then you are now at risk. And there's a lot of things you can do by raising your hand and being proactive within the studio, coming up with ideas that help and upskill everyone around you, potentially being part of the employer brand for the studio. Like there's a lot of things that aren't in your job description where if you just raise your hand and do more things, it makes you second. It basically makes you irreplaceable. Like that's what you want to become essentially. You just want to be doing so many good things for the business as a whole, holistically, within reason, and it will make a layoff. You won't be on the first layoff, the second layoff, third layoff, because there's always going to be someone who's doing less. So you can. That's in your power always. Alrighty. In terms of next question, I have a lovely one from Wendy Prancer. So good to see you, John. Question: how does a consumer best support those that make the games? Is it just a matter of purchase or something else? I hope that makes sense. So this is on a consumer point of view.
First of all, a couple of names, Wendy, Saurabh. I just want to thank you guys and other names that are in chat right now for so constantly and consistently attending events like this and asking questions that I truly could not thank you more for, because you're creating these conversations. And so Wendy, Saurabh, everybody else, Tarak, thank you so much for these questions. I'm aspiring to answer these questions in new ways. And so all of this comes with a big asterisk, which is like, in addition to all the great content that you'll see Justin, Ida, Aaron, Amir, so many others posting about all day long, Alex, Christina Marie Drake, Jaleesa Eliason, Marie over the Fairy Job Mother and Netflix. All these people, follow them. They post much better content than whatever the schmuck's going to say all day long. But to go back to your question, would you mind reading it one more time?
Yeah, this is for consumers. So when they are supporting a studio, so I think it's like a
yeah.
What do you
So
think?
Vote with your dollars, of course, but I would actually recommend, if you really want to become an activist here. So you're writing a review for this game, right? You bought the game, you're writing a review for this game. hey, look, what you say in your Steam review or your App Store review or whatever is going to matter. It's going to weigh something. And
Hmm.
your star rating, it is a way that we hold companies accountable through their product success or not. And I more than once have made comments in my feedback about the studio practices in addition to the quality of the game itself. Because what I'm asking myself is, would I tell my friend to buy this game? If that company has a multi-billion-dollar profit and they chose to engage in layoffs simply because cost optimization was this trend right now, and they're probably going to hire the same people back in 3 months, I am going to call that out in that review because I want people to know that, because that might be the only place that they see that and their only chance to vote with their dollars meaningfully. So hopefully a different take that nobody's heard before.
I haven't heard of it, and it makes so much sense. So yes, good take. Alrighty. Um, some of these questions we have covered a little bit, so I'll go to the ones that are a bit different, and then if we have time, I will come back to them. So we have one question from Sahaj Shahbaz. Apologies if I butchered that name. Hey guys, thanks a lot for holding this session and for providing such valuable insights. I have two questions. What are some effective strategies for globally remote candidates from emerging markets to effectively tackle the layoff job scarcity epidemic? I could give a 2 cents on this if you don't mind, John, and then you can add to this.
Please.
So
You're the
I
subject
have
matter expert on this, Harry. Please do.
I have hired from North Macedonia, Czechia, Prague, and at least within Evolution, when we hire contractors, we go off what the client desires. A lot of the time, they ask for the client to be based in Europe, and a smaller subset of clients, which is growing actually, do not care where the candidate is based as long as it's within a time zone of like plus 2-3 hours. So as long as you have your own company set up, because if you're thinking it from the company perspective, if they do not have the infrastructure to hire you as an employee, they're going to have to outsource that, and that is expensive. That might cost upwards of 1,000 to 2,000 a month just to kind of put you through that system. So you either need to be the bee's knees or have your own company set up where you could go through like an agency, for example, where Evolution, we would just bill you, for example, and then the client would never feel the difference. So to answer your question, obviously have a LinkedIn profile super up to date with your actual work references. Sometimes people from emerging markets, I speak to them, and the projects they've worked on are fantastic. But the company, it's not clear what they do from the outside, and people make the assumption that the recruiter is going to click on the company, go to the thing, see what type of game it is. If your company is not well known, please in your CV make it very clear what that gaming company does. You paint a picture of the company because the recruiter might not have, probably won't have the time to go and research each company individually. So just make your CV easy to read, fun to read, and like tell them that story. This is why this game's important. If you worked on a project, it was 8 of you for a year, and the game did not succeed in terms of going out, but the game was really, really good and you made a big impact. It's on Steam with good reviews, but not financially successful. I've placed those type of candidates just because they've explained exactly what they did and they have it on their portfolio. But if you just went, was part of a game that didn't release, yeah, it's going to be quite hard. So just being very clear and trying to explain and showcase your experience in a way where if a recruiter's going to be considering your profile, it's likely because they couldn't find a local candidate, or if they're a globally remote company, they're just looking for the best talent. And so you have high competition. So if it answers your question, essentially make it very, very clear on your CV what company you work for does and the setting up a local company, just making sure your taxes are in order. Don't you want that to be the last thing that the client's thinking of, essentially? Anything to add?
Harry, to add an additional tactical piece there, I am dropping a link into the chat. It should show up in chat. It's going into the comments on this event right here.
Yeah.
And it is a post that Jordan Mazer over at A16Z made moments ago, which is wrapped in a "Hey rioters, here's some help," but is ultimately yet another one of Jordan Mazer. If anybody doesn't know Jordan Mazer, go follow him right now. He heads up talent over A16Z, former rioter. And A16Z is Andreessen Horowitz, which in my opinion is one of the most forward-thinking and most influential venture capital funds in the world.
Hmm.
A16Z has a Games Fund 1, which is a $150 million fund that is currently powering a number of really exciting studios that I think are going to be super transformational. They're also bleeding edge. So they're working in Web3, a ton of blockchain, ton of AR, VR, XR, really cool stuff, which comes back to this question, I believe, and Harry, check me on this, please. In my experience, companies who are building things that have never been built before tend to look in places that haven't been looked before for talent. And that might
Yes.
mean developing countries. That might mean, in some cases, having to engage in contractors who kind of go out and find and aggregate that talent and then provide it in places like Tel Aviv, in places like Kiev, in places like Manila. Just thinking of Ivory Coast, like places that are real. When you talk about emerging, you mean really emerging markets. Um, I would look toward that link and go and check that out, follow that guy, because those studios are typically some of the most forward-thinking ones who are probably the most open to exploring those things.
100%. I'm just reflecting now. Like the blockchain gaming companies, they were the ones where like a lot of the blockchain talent happens to be in Romania or in emerging markets. I even looked in like Taiwan at one point because the client was like, "We don't care, just find the person," kind of thing. So, yeah, very very good point. If you do like blockchain, for example, have a look at LinkedIn. Search people that live near you that live work in the gaming industry. What type of jobs do they have? If you're seeing a common theme, maybe angle your profile to be towards those type of companies. And once you're in the once you have that gaming company experience, you've basically got your foot in the door, and then you can go differently from there. Even if you don't want to stay in blockchain forever for whatever reason, just getting your foot in the door is the important thing. So yeah, don't make it hard for yourself. Fantastic. Righty. Um, I want to say, I have a question from Tarek Ford, Head of Development at Quali. So you've touched on it a little. I want to give back by helping people either get into the gaming industry or advance their careers in the gaming industry. What's the best way to do this? Is it as simple as posting on LinkedIn, or are there any specific organizations I can get involved with? So this is from a leader.
So one is real straightforward and it's plug and play. That's just jumping in and working with Amir's mentoring resources, volunteering as a mentor, volunteering as a mock interviewer. I have rounded the base on somewhere in the neighborhood of between 250 and 275 of those conversations. And
Oh,
I
really?
always
Huh?
like I was that.
Hey, just to clarify, you did 275 mentor calls through. I mean,
So
wow.
far, yeah, between the mock interviews and the just sort of simple mentoring, usually sort of exploratory, sometimes even counseling calls. And I love them. I'll set aside 4 hours out of my week that are protected just for that. And I love it. It's just fantastic.
That's fantastic.
And the wonder, the beauty of this too, Tarek, is one of the things that's frustrating is when you want to volunteer time and help, when there's no vehicle to do that. You've got this incredibly valuable resource, your knowledge and time, and no way to apply it in a way that's meaningful. That's heartbreaking. Amir has solved for that. So that's the super easy answer. My other answer is actually one that I'm synthesizing based upon conversations over these last couple of days with Marie Benigno Bleza, with Christina Marie Drake, with Justin Williams, which is really what you post, what you say on LinkedIn matters because it's contributing to the narrative and ultimately the culture of what's going on right now. And so if you're posting about ways that you can recover from this while acknowledging and humanizing what's going on, you're helping to, in some cases, you could be what buoys somebody to get through. And I'm not just talking about, staying in the industry, which I hope people do. I'm not just talking about getting into the industry, which I equally hope that people do. I'm really even talking about like people feeling safe and psychologically okay, because people knowing that they're not alone. Tarek, you posting as a leader and acknowledging and even talking about, hey, I know this is a hard time. You offering of your own energy and time. That could literally be what tells somebody, hey, maybe I'm not alone, and gives them a shred of hope that they needed in that moment. So that might sound silly. That might sound like, thank you, universe. Let's go buy some crystals. Infer what you want from that, folks. I do believe that you matter when you post and that you are one of many voices that's in a choir. And what you're singing is ultimately whatever you're putting out there. So I recommend being part of the positive side of that choir.
Couldn't second that enough. And I have evidence again because I've started posting daily since October, and I get those messages, and so it does happen. And usually, funny enough, they're messages from people who've never engaged, never liked. Sometimes, so one thing to always remember when you're posting on LinkedIn: impressions are real people,
Mm.
especially on LinkedIn where everyone's a verified profile, which is kind of a funny thing that we forget sometimes. Twitter, you don't know who is real. LinkedIn, it's kind of hard to have a fake Harry Foku. Like you need to go and add all your CV and then actually have a similar. It's not happening. So impressions are real people. If 1,000 people see it, that's not a bad post. Like 1,000 people saw, potentially read and resonated. And one thing to make this a bit easier, so you can like sleep easy at night when you have a full-time job as head of development, don't try to recreate the wheel. Just document what you've learned. If you're gonna do the mentor course with Amir Sadvat, that is the perfect opportunity. Get the questions that you've been asked, think about your answers, record those calls if they allow you to. Just make the creating the post as easy as possible. So, first example, have those counseling calls. Apologies, the informational calls. Whatever they are asking you, 1,000 other people are asking. Write a post about it. And again, I just learned this the hard way. One message, one post. Don't try to give an essay and like a massive link to a guide unless you start building that over time. Just for example, if someone needs help on how do they reach out to a mentor on LinkedIn, you write a post about that, and then please input your personal story, which I know Tarek has one as well. So always document, don't create, unless you're going to go into it full time. And an easy hack for me is just literally just look for the last month. Go through your meetings. It's like, oh, that meeting was really interesting. What did happen in that meeting? Ah, that. Great. That's today's post. Try and make it as easy as possible. You don't have to post every day. Post 3 times a week. If you do that, plus the mentoring calls, you're like in the top 0.0001%, and you're going to help other people. Amazing.
Harry, I've got a
Lovely.
couple, just to quickly mention this. A few folks are messaging me personally just to answer this question and save everybody some reading. The Web3 service I was talking about is called freename.io. That's the name of the website. And you can, to answer your question, George, you literally just type in george.gaming if that's the domain you're looking for. If you do want to get involved in blockchain Web3 gaming, I would recommend that one. So literally you would go to freename.io, search for george.gaming. And then, of course, you would buy it and build your website around it, or simply do a redirect to your existing link tree. It just really shows that like I'm in this world. So I see more people asking that question in my own messaging, so I thought I'd answer it here.
Perfect. Lovely. Thank you, everyone, for saying thank you. Thank you, Alex, Wendy, Tarek, Sorab, Darren, Kim, Paul, Ali Farka joined, Kate, loads of people. So thank you, everyone, for joining. This has been Harry Foku. Don't think I even gave an intro, but essentially, I host gaming leaders on podcasts and I work for Evolution Recruitment Gaming. We place contractors at gaming studios. That's the only thing we do. So if you are talent, looking to become a consultant, or if you need consultants on your team, I'm just a DM away. And also, I'm also always looking for people like John, like yourself, who can give insight. So happy to be a platform. Just message me if you want more details. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Bye,
Fantastic.
y'all.
Sure. Bye bye.